research, and national development. Since the dawn of civilization, intellectuals were sponsored and quoted by kings for their ability to analyze human beings and their habitat, foretell events, and provide solutions to societal problems. The successes of the Western region government of Nigeria were not unconnected with the resource of internet, which Chief of Afemi Awolowo frequently sought and utilized maximally. A number of Nigerian state governments, including Lagos, have also followed this trend. Because of their extraordinary training and uncommon devotion to intensive study, intellectuals were able, as it were, to see the unseen, to throw some light on the dark, and show the way to humanity. It is no less so in modern times, despite the fact that universities now stand away from the King's Court in the true spirit of academic freedom. Most notable developments in the arts, sciences, politics, and other spheres of life therefore clearly owe their origins to intellectuals. However, academics live in their own communities, like in Idiaraba and in Akoka, and indeed in Ojo and in Ekpe. And they speak their own peculiar language, as we have heard from our very erudite Vice-Chancellor. Very often, their engagement with study causes them to stay away from the general community. And they come up for air only now and then to point out the folly of the latter. This separation has sometimes been problematic This separation has sometimes been problematic though. Problems brew in the real world, and possible solutions are doomed to languish unused if they are not primed for popular appreciation and application, which accounts for the near cliche of, quote, bridging the gap between the town and the gang, end of quote. It leads, perhaps I might say, sometimes to very well-founded opinions without the facts. As for the University of Lagos and Lagos State, a slight digression. I must observe that we can have no better setting for this discussion than the University of Lagos. When this institution was conceived soon after independence, it was for the declared purpose of fostering education and research for national development. So much hope was invested here and in other pioneering universities by the founding fathers of Nigeria. However, I laid particularly emphasis on the University of Lagos because it was the one closest to the corridors of power, and indeed it still remains close to the corridor of power, and indeed to the corridor of influence. And it remains situate in the center of commerce and excellence. As we all know, Lagos was the capital of Nigeria at the time. If for various reasons to be explored, the reality of Nigeria today is not as beautiful as the dream of yesteryears, I think it is only proper for the University of Lagos to lead what I will refer to as the rededication process. And there is, of course, no faculty better suited to direct the discourse than the School of Postgraduate Studies. You know, somebody always said to me that if you want to applaud, just do so. in 2007. I came back in 2011, and you voted for the Action Congress of Nigeria. It must therefore be correct to say that the history and the aspirations and modest successes of our administration also have much to do with the University of Lagos. Some of the developmental factors that we ought to pay attention to in Nigeria have already been determined and proposed in several media. These invariably include education, research, and innovation. By all accounts, these intertwined factors hold so much promise. They are the reasons behind modern civilization, and history shows us that they have never failed those countries that truly embrace them. Certainly, the gains of education, research, and innovation are too obvious to merit the effort and expense of further elucidation. However, a cursory look at the education and research field in Nigeria still reveals some unsavory realities. This would justify the suspicion that, as a nation, we are yet to absorb the whole truth about these crucial factors. As long as this doubt persists, the efforts of this evening cannot be worthless. If, as I hope, what we wish for is a better appreciation of the place of education and research in national development, I think we would have achieved something, even if all we do here today is to say what has been said before. Although we shall be discussing education as a holistic subject, I will pay particular attention to the universities, which are the institutions most closely connected to research and development. By definition, a university is an institution of higher education and research. The word university is derived from the Latin word Universitas Magistrorum et Scholarium, which roughly translated means community of teachers and scholars. A university represents the highest center of learning in its community, and to that extent helps to predict and promote the advancement of civilization. For all our engagement with the physical phenomena as in science and technology, it is noteworthy that universities actually started with the spiritual and the philosophical. Prior to their formal establishment, many medieval universities were run for hundreds of years as Christian cathedral schools or monastic schools in which monks and nuns taught classes. In the West, the earliest universities were developed under the aegis of the Latin Church, usually from cathedral schools, although some were later founded by monarchs or municipal administrators. Be that as it may, many historians agree that universities and cathedral schools were a continuation of the interest in learning promoted by monasteries. In the East, the role was played by the religious madrasa schools. The earliest areas of scholarly interest in all cases included theology, philosophy, medicine, law, history, and the arts. However, my intention here is to point out the ethical, spiritual, and philosophical basis of knowledge, the loss of which may be undermining all our ultra-modern and high-tech civilization. Universities grew popular with the belief that society will benefit from the scholarly expertise they generate. The bulk of research and education that has changed the conditions of man, extended the boundaries of civilization, and given us a better idea of ourselves and the world we live in. All of this emanated from universities, whether directly or indirectly. Even where students, scientists, and inventors operated outside formal institutional settings, much of the building blocks and influential basis of knowledge were provided by university scholars and students. Another role that universities play is that very important one of bridging or equalizing knowledge across civilizations. This may have been uppermost in the minds of our founding fathers as they established the first set of universities for Nigeria, that we could thereby raise scholars who will be able to access and harvest the products of current research efforts across the globe, thereby creating a quick but solid foundation for the truly Nigerian contribution. In return, the Nigerian contribution will not only address our peculiar problems, but offer up its results for use by the rest of the world. Research, according to Professor Ishaq Oloyede, Vice Chancellor of the University of Ilorin, is, quote, the process of proffering solutions to human problems through well-defined methods. It is a systematic way of learning to relearn and unlearn based on new insights deriving from knowledge, end of quote. I want to underscore the phrase, learning to relearn and unlearn based on new insights deriving from knowledge, as I consider it the cornerstone of progressive education. Many of us here today who studied chemistry in the 1960s learned by heart Dalton's atomic theory to the effect that, quote, the atom is the smallest indivisible particle of an element, end of quote. However, our young children now tell us of modern atomic theory, and further research has since shown that the atom, then regarded as the smallest indivisible particle of an element, can actually be split into three: protons, neutrons, and electrons. In essence, therefore, we must relearn what we have already learned. Similar results, therefore, of continuous scrutiny abound, showing that in spite of the phenomenal developments recorded thus far, much more still lies beyond our known horizons. A lot has changed about our geography and our weather. June to end of August used to be rainy season when I was in secondary school. That's the geography I learned. But it rained only last week. And it was raining in torrents even in November. What is therefore important for the moment is that the true dimensions of current knowledge have first to be systematically disseminated through a nation's educational system. Then such learning has to be applied in society towards the ultimate goal of national development, which must of course encompass the personnel development of individual citizens. I deal next with the concept of national development, and this is what I have to say. That national development may be measured as the extent to which a country is able to enhance the welfare of its people, such as by providing social amenities like quality and qualitative education, portable water, an efficient transportation system, medical care, and so on and so forth. National development must therefore be a matter of continuous concern. But I argue that political stability or instability, as the case may be, is also a strong barometer for measuring national development. How peacefully and free of rancor can we change our leadership and representatives? Considering the infinite possibilities for improvement, decline or collapse of the so-called civilized systems, development must be seen as a dynamic obligation of every country, irrespective of its current level on the ladder. For instance, the decline of communism and the effect of recent economic upheavals in the developed world, have placed question marks on some assumed models of welfarism and socio-economic development. thereby confirming that when it comes to national development, sustenance is even more important than achievement. And I want to dwell on this, the need for sustenance. All of us acknowledge, without debate, the remarkable work that the first civilian elected governor of this state did in providing housing. And I speak of no less a personality than Alhaji Lateef Kayode Jakonde. But why has it been so difficult to sustain that legacy? This is the challenge that we face today. This is what we are dealing with in our Lagos Homes project. And sooner rather than later, I think that we will find an answer. Somebody sent me an email recently and said, look, that Lagos State should import beef and give it out for free, citing the Eromuri. Again, the question I have asked myself, is that a sustainable model? Does it improve the income and the productivity of our beef farmers? Is that a model we want to pursue? Those are the debates for national development. But clearly, if we can replicate Alhaji Jakonde's model, that is a model we want to sustain. Massive housing construction will have a multiplier effect of unquantifiable proportions on the local economy. But let me quickly go to what I call the challenges of national development in Nigeria. Development, I say, is a widely participatory process of social change, bringing in its wake both social and material advancement, including social welfare, greater equality and freedom, better conditions of living, and other valued qualities. Indeed, this will apply for the majority of the people. I discuss the Human Developmental Index and make comments about these indices as used by the United Nations to measure the growth and the development in nations. And some of the parameters are parameters of life expectancy, mean years of schooling. So it would mean, for example, also in terms of development, whether a 4-year course lasts 10 years, expected years of schooling, the gross national income per capita, and those other parameters. And using these metrics, the United Nations has grouped nations into 4 broad categories. The first category is a category of very high human development. The second category is high human development. The third category is medium human development. And of course, the last category is low human development. In the latest Human Development Index released in November 2011, our country sadly keeps its place in the last category. And this is very sad. But in the context of these international metrics, our underlying developmental challenges in Nigeria will include issues of law, security of lives and property, public infrastructure, mass transportation, food security, employment, and productivity. However, it might be worthwhile for us to consider the corruption of personal and social values as perhaps the single most important underlying factor of which other failures are symptomatic. And I venture to argue that corruption is not about cash alone. The more debilitating corruption is the one that compromises law and order, the one that breaks rules in our day-to-day lives, the one in which when there is traffic, we choose to drive in the opposite direction. Those are much more debilitating acts of corruption than we can ever imagine the damage that they do. They undermine the spirit of consensus and predictability that hold a nation together. The corruption where we are not patient to take our turn. The corruption where might is right. The corruption where we refuse to put very simple vehicle registration plates on our cars because we are big men. It is a criminal offense. With every sense of modesty and with your mandate, the votes of over 1 million citizens in this state, and I say this with every sense of modesty, no citizen could be more privileged than I am in the state. But my vehicle has a registration number. And with your indulgence, it is LASG 01. And indeed, every vehicle in my convoy. How can we detect crime committed with vehicles if in the name of our big manism we mask vehicle registration numbers? Those are the very deep acts of corruption that endanger all of us. And the sooner we put an end to them, the safer and better we will be as a people. Let us also remember that this type of corruption, many of you will remember Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae. They are far removed organizations away from here. But it was deep-seated corruption, violation of rules, lending to unworthy people that brought about the onset of the global financial crisis. But it affected us here. That is very, very debilitating corruption. It is worse than just bribery. It's pulled the whole planet into a crisis. But I go on to say about our attitudes and our values. We ask for change. We ask for improved wages. We ask for better roads. We ask for better welfare. We ask for improved governance. Essentially, therefore, we ask for change, not so. Are we ready to change? Hello? Those are the serious developmental issues that we must ask ourselves, because those changes will come at a cost. And therefore, I say that although it is noteworthy that corruption in this wider sense constitutes the visible fault line of even the most developed nations, whereby ethical failings, corruption in the financial sectors and public administration, moral degradation as represented by illicit businesses, drug addiction, prostitution, terrorism, and other social vices detract greatly from the advancements which ought ordinarily to be enjoyed by these people. But I posit again that corruption is not the problem. Corruption is the symptom that manifests from the real problem. The real problem is our national underdevelopment. It is what puts us in a desperate situation. And when people are desperate, I understand, but I do not concede that it is excusable for them to break rules. But be that as it may, our focus this evening remains the relationship between education, research, and national development. And I think it is therefore pertinent to explore the question whether Nigeria's poor showing on the Development Index can be attributed to our failure to use the instrumentality of education and research to improve social welfare. In the light of that assessment, we can go on to consider the extent to which our research institutions, typified by our universities, have been able to deliver on their statutory mandates, to proffer possible steps which may be taken to strengthen them in that regard. I deal with what I call the research and report mandate of universities. As in other university statutes, the provisions of the University of Lagos Act, Chapter U9, Laws of the Federation of Nigeria 2004, underscore the importance of research as a cardinal function of the university. Section 1, subsection 3C, for instance, charges the universities to, quote, encourage, promote, and conduct research in all fields of learning and human endeavor, end of quote. In line with this mandate, one would expect our universities and research institutions to be at the forefront of efforts to solve our perennial problems, such as the design and construction of affordable housing with locally available materials, water purification, development of alternative and renewable energy sources, agricultural development, management of small businesses and cottage industries, crime investigation, corruption in public administration, religious and ethnic conflicts. However, events compel me to the conclusion that in Nigeria we have unwittingly allowed too wide a gulf between our educational institutions and the demands of society at large. In other words, we take education, research, and the award of degrees almost as an end and not as a means to an end. I ask the question, how many of our public officers, permanent secretaries, commissioners, presidents, ministers, who have served with some distinction, have come back to the universities to share what they learned? And this is what you see in other nations that we aspire to compete against. And very readily, I can give you the example of a Condoleezza Rice who has gone back to university. And one can only guess that if she was discussing political science, after all of the beautiful theories that she may have learned, she can go back to the university and say, you know what, it didn't quite work like that during the Bush days. And that takes us back to the learning to relearn and to unlearn. Because what will then happen is that the students who are the beneficiary of any of Condoleezza Rice's or such men and women of our ilk will learn what she learned when she was an undergraduate. But they would have the momentous privilege of also learning as undergraduates what it took her a lifetime to learn. And you know what kind of people they will be when they come out to lead? They will be more than adequately prepared people. I asked the question, how many policies of government are driven by research from term papers by the students? Every year, you write term paper, not so? How many gets to us? But it will no longer be that way, at least not in Lagos. I have told my colleagues in the State Executive Council that anytime we have a problem, let us engage with the heads of departments and heads of faculties in the various universities, set the problem to them, and they know the ways that they formulate term papers for the students. And in some way, the students who want to graduate will happily also be contributing to the development of Lagos. Let me publicly acknowledge that this government has benefited from such a relationship. There's a gentleman who spent many of his Sundays with his wife going to study Lagos traffic with his camera and his laptop, trying to identify what is causing the traffic. I met him perchance immediately I became governor-elect in March or April 2007. He showed me 25 areas of Lagos where traffic gridlock could be resolved with very simple solutions. He told me that it was inexpensive to do it. We brought him to the State Executive Council. He had a hard time persuading my colleagues in the State Executive Council that one model will work. Indeed, I remember a commissioner said, look at you people. If this man was an Oyibo man, he would have agreed since. But you know, by adopting his very simple ideas, we created an extra lane under the Mende, Maryland bypass to free traffic. We moved the turning points and the intersections in front of Country Club and Sheraton Hotel on Mobolaji Bankantoni Way to free gridlock. We created an underpass under Muson Center and freed the traffic around Nitel area. And there are other solutions like that that we have adopted that is contributing to the free flow of traffic in Lagos. If Professor Olusoya is in the hall, can he rise and take a bow? The professor of architecture from this university. Thank you so much. Therefore, I say that our society, the town and the gown, appear to exist as two separate balls that barely touch. But from tonight, there will be two balls in the same sack. We must be practical about the curriculum that we apply in our schools today. And it is only when the town and the gown meet that we can have very effective and efficient curricula. Our curricula have become so outdated, and most employers are compelled to retrain and reorientate fresh employees to meet the demands of the workplace. In many instances, employees are urged to forget the theory that they learned in school and wake up to the realities of the outside world. Because we have identified this as a serious contributory factor to unemployment, Lagos State government is currently sponsoring a graduate employability and entrepreneurial skill acquisition program called the Lagos Ignite Enterprise and Employability Project. This we are doing in collaboration with a center called the After School Graduate Development Center. We use this as a way to bridge the gap and equip our graduates with skill sets that their societies now require. In a similar vein, we have organized special inception training in education and teaching skills for degree holders in pure sciences and languages to cater for the specific needs of our public secondary schools and thereby increase their students' performance. On the opening day, thousands of graduates applying for these programs within days of their advertisement constituted a clear and open acknowledgement of the misalignment between our university education and the requirements of the workplace. Something was clearly wrong. If thousands of graduates were applying for an after-school graduate program in order to find work, there was a problem. But we've taken the first batch that we can. We have deployed them to our secondary schools to start a career in teaching. They have received the necessary training because they already know they're graduates of either physics, chemistry, biology, mathematics, English language. Now we are complaining that our students are not doing well in these courses. But we have graduates who know these subjects. What they do not know is how to manage a classroom. And they're unemployed, and there's a vacuum. So through the colleges of education, we created a program for classroom management, which they went through. I think it took about 10 weeks. We paid allowances during that period, and we employed all those who passed. Very soon, I believe that there will be another opportunity for another 700 of them that will be advertised in the near term. But I think that we must think out of the box and create in our schools. If our students and our generation still love the gown and the hat, we must create very practical curriculum for them so that they can be useful when they come out. I mentioned quickly the example of the idea of a school of transportation in Lasso. I doubt, and I stand to be corrected, whether there is any Nigerian university that offers such a course. But in a rapidly urbanizing world, where city populations are growing, Lagos as one of the examples, Accra, Cairo, Johannesburg, and indeed, if you go to other states, Benin City is beginning to have traffic problem. Rivers is having. Abuja, of course, no brainer. Who are our transport experts and planners? Can we not be the university of first choice for transport planning and traffic management for the whole of the sub-region of West Africa? We have so much water around us and everybody is lamenting. Why can't you put ferry? Nigerian universities are offering graduate courses in cinematography. Those are some of the strongest indicators of the demands of our current economy. Those who may be studying such courses will continue to produce graduates of business administration in an economy that is shrinking. Which businesses are you going to manage? I think that it is important, therefore, to develop a curricula that recognizes the needs of today's economy that we run. Yes, my parents went to school to get degrees to become general managers of companies operating under British Charter, UAC, PZ, and all of them. But this generation must become the generation of business owners, not storekeepers and managers in their own country. And therefore, we need a curriculum that prepares them to be entrepreneurs, to be builders of capital rather than managers of capital. And this is the reason why research becomes compelling and I argue very forcefully for research funding. I say, for example, that research is conducted in UNILAG as it is in other universities, and it is in fact a prerequisite for career advancement in all universities. Thus, a professor may be assumed to have done considerable research to merit his or her professorship. One may consequently predict that on the shelves in the hidden lanes of our university libraries are products of some of our finest brains. Yes, there is very little evidence of these local research efforts being simplified for popular media, being presented to the entrepreneurial or political class, or being translated into something very handy for practical benefit for a society. I make the case about education and research as problem-solving tools. And I say that since the World War I, higher education has proved itself as the single most effective instrument of countries reaching for development. In terms of economic restructuring, social improvement, democracy, national defense, human capital, and the promotion of commerce, the academia in more successful countries have made profound contributions in directly assisting entrepreneurs and practitioners who facilitate the attainment of set national goals. I cite the example of Japan, for instance, following the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki during the Second World War. The country reached a clear consensus that education was essential for both individual and national development, and that it required active and sustained commitment of energy and resources at all levels Today, the World Bank points to investment in education as a crucial factor in the rapid economic and technological development of Japan. The progress that Japan has made in the last 50 years, Japan is now in trouble. They have recorded recently their first trade deficit in many decades. Their population is aging, their workforce is diminishing. But it is easy to guess that they will not sit down and moan. They will act. And I can bear testimony that they have started acting. I'm privileged to sit on an advisory committee of the World Health Organization that meets annually in Kobe, in Japan. And although it is not part of our remit from the World Health Organization, the sponsors are the Japanese Chamber of Commerce in Kobe. And because they fund it, they have asked us to start thinking what they can do about their aging population and how they can find a solution to regrow their productivity. Indeed, if you go to Kobe, I think that is the place that my aides least like to go. Because all of the people you will see there are over 80. The town is empty at 7 p.m. And what they always tell me is, "That when are we going home?" But there are lessons to be learned from that. That is also the success of a very successfully implemented healthcare policy. But it speaks to us that our life indeed will be an unending cycle of problems. If you don't have good healthcare policy, people will die young. But if you prolong their life for a long time, there will still be problems. Because the longer they live, the bigger the chance that they will be on the public debt, because you will pay pension for a very long time. This is the reality. And you will see countries like Singapore, the United Kingdom, they are trying to increase the retirement age so that they can reduce the public debt burden by way of pensions. So when we have problems here, let us stop mourning and find a solution. There are problems across the world. The research and development in the Nigerian situation. And I say that the close connection between national developmental goals and the output of the educational system is increasingly difficult to find in Nigeria, despite the constitutional admonitions that, quote, government shall promote science and technology, and that government shall strive to eradicate illiteracy, end of quote. I believe that the objective of the drafters of the Constitution was for us to use the instrumentality of literacy, arts, science, and technology to address our many issues of national development. It is therefore pertinent to ask how far we have come in using the instrumentalities of education and research for the promotion of national development. In order to answer this question, it is not enough, in my view, to refer to the GDP growth, which has become our favorite swan song. The realities on the ground are stark enough to give us our yardsticks. To the man on the street, the only appreciable indicators will be the security of lives and property, access to qualitative education and medical care, employment opportunities, and the ease of doing business, including power supply and other enablers. Questions will arise, therefore, as to the extent to which Nigerian researchers have focused on and proffered solutions to these particular problems, and perhaps more importantly, to the extent to which we as government and other relevant agencies and individuals are able to access and make use of such research reports and academic expertise. Similar variations and fluctuations are seen in our educational policies. In the absence of a definite and sustained policy in the various aspects of our national life, it becomes practically difficult for meaningful research to be conducted locally on any subject. So we always end up blaming the IMF and the World Bank for many measures which we consider unpopular. The consequence is aptly captured by Dr. Shehu Ahmed Jimo in his paper, Educational Research in Nigeria, Some Local Forces Inhibiting Progress and the Way Forward. And this is what he says, and I quote him extensively. Before the researcher concludes an evaluative study of a particular program or policy, it is either discarded or replaced with a different, sometimes completely divergent policy or program. Political instability has also taken its toll on the educational and research institutes in Nigeria. The academic calendar is frequently disrupted. There are strikes, lockouts, closures, and general social upheavals. And all this can influence the orientation, timing, process, and quality of any research in the field of education. And yet, the politician or policymaker out there is waiting with his characteristic suspicion of and impatience with the education researcher. End of quote. And of course, I say about funding that it is undeniable that our educational institutions are grossly underfunded compared to their contemporaries across the world. But again, this is relative. How much do we spend in our public life? The total budget of Lagos State is perhaps struggling to catch up with the budget of the New York Department of Police alone. So when we are looking at the absolute numbers of underfunding, it must be relative also to the total disposable income of the two societies. I say that this is perpetuated by the policy of keeping school fees very low, even at the tertiary level, while relying heavily on government subsidies. However, the fact is that there are always too many commitments competing for government resources, and the subsidy is never commensurate with the amount really required to run these institutions optimally and efficiently. And as our chief host has said, I now have a local government here that I also have to support whether I like it or I do not. Little can be expected. And I think this tells the story of our educational institutions. We cannot run away from the fact that research output will only be proportionate to the available funding, and I dare say, commitment. This is corroborated by Jimo, who I have cited, where he observed, and I quote him again, that the resources available for research are grossly inadequate, just as is the case in too many other African countries. Even when special funds are provided for research, they are too inadequate to meet the research needs of Nigeria. Consequently, developing African nations still depend on all forms of foreign aid to support research, such as those provided by USAID and UNESCO. The reality, therefore, is that the research expenditure of the top 20 research universities in the United States exceeds the annual budgets of many African countries. And the figures are in the appendix to my speech, the second appendix to my speech, which I hope is in circulation. And the extent of the national wealth is, of course, a limiting factor. And that is the point that I have tried to make. How much do we really have as a country? It is therefore not surprising that African universities are often missing in the world university rankings. And even when it comes to African university rankings, Nigerian universities are placed far down the list. But this is something that we are determined to change even before I leave office. Links with the society and better publicity of research efforts or research grants, which I have started to do. As in other jurisdictions, it will be inspiring to see a coordinated and a sustained research program on the particular societal problems of Nigeria. This must, of course, be preceded by an accurate diagnostic assessment. Extra effort should be made to clearly articulate both the motivation and the results. I say that it is imperative for universities to take their cue from society and the business world, even in deciding on areas of research, and to develop parameters for measuring the utility of such research and the results that they produce. I suggest that there should be an institutionalized system of staff exchange between universities and industries. For instance, the Lagos State government is institutionalizing collaborative efforts of this nature by involving local students and lecturers in large and novel projects, such as we did with the demolition of the Bank of Industry building, which was the first controlled demolition in this part. And we wrote to this school to send its engineering students to come and witness that event.